I'm Sarah Miller, 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer, currently facing a difficult period after my old company ran into trouble and I decided to venture out on my own. Financial pressure and career instability weighed heavily on me, causing me frequent anxiety and sleepless nights. My husband, David, 35 years old, a calm and rational software engineer, decided we should move into the old wooden house he inherited from his late grandfather in the remote countryside of Pennsylvania. Near the small town of Silent Creek, he believed that the fresh air and tranquility here would help me relax and focus on my new endeavors. The house was nestled deep within a large property, completely isolated from neighboring residential areas. It was surrounded by endless cornfields and sparse woods, where ancient trees with gnarled branches stretched towards the gray sky. The house looked quite ordinary, but it was clear that it had been unoccupied for a long time. The white paint was peeling in many places, revealing the gray wood beneath. Every time I stepped onto the wooden porch steps, a mournful creak echoed, like the groan of an old creature. The smell of mildew, decaying wood, and a faint earthy odor permeated the air. David always reassured me that it was just an old house needing renovation, but I, with my sensitivity and tendency to overthink, felt an eerily silent atmosphere pervading the place. An unusual stillness, as if the house held a hidden secret from the past. Even during the day, when sunlight streamed in, I still felt an invisible coldness lingering in the nooks and crannies. That evening, around late October 2023, Sarah and David were driving home after having dinner in the next town. The sky had fallen deep into night, past 11 p.m. The small road leading to their house, Willow Creek Road, was pitch black, without a single streetlight illuminating the way. On both sides of the road, ancient maple and oak trees stood majestically, their gnarled branches reaching up to obscure even the faint moonlight, creating bizarre shadows that swayed with the rhythmic jolting of the car. The car's interior was silent, save for the steady hum of the engine and the dry friction of tires against the gravel road. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, feeling a little tired after a long day and the incessant thoughts about work. She leaned her head against the cold window pane, gazing out. The scene was eerily quiet. Not a single light from a nearby house. No dog barking or insect chirping. A chilling sense of loneliness and desolation enveloped her, making her feel as if she was detached from the outside world. Suddenly, the car's headlights cut through the darkness, revealing a figure lying face down in the middle of the road ahead. "David, stop the car!" Sarah exclaimed in a panic, her voice escaping uncontrollably, shattering the silence in the car. David startled, his foot slamming on the brake. The car skidded for a moment on the gravel, then abruptly came to a halt, not far from the figure. It was the shape of a woman, lying motionless on the road, appearing very frail and pitiful. "Oh my God, what happened?" David exclaimed, his voice filled with worry, then quickly turned off the engine. The engine's hum ceased, leaving an eerily silent space. Around them, there was not a single house, only dense trees and thick darkness. The cold late autumn wind unexpectedly swept through, carrying damp air and the smell of moist soil from a nearby field, making Sarah shiver. Both Sarah and David felt a sense of foreboding, an unease creeping into every cell of their bodies. "You stay in the car. I'll go check," David said, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible, though Sarah could sense the tension in his every muscle. He opened the door and stepped out, the sound of the car door opening echoing strangely in the dark night. Sarah watched her husband's figure anxiously. Her heart pounded in her chest, a sense of foreboding spiraling deeper into her mind. She gripped the seatbelt tightly, her eyes fixed on David's figure as he slowly approached the strange woman. The space outside seemed to thicken with silence and darkness, creating a chilling and terrifying tableau. David moved cautiously, step by step, approaching the woman lying on the road. The car's headlights were still on, clearly illuminating her figure. David called out softly, his voice a mixture of worry and caution. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can you hear me?" There was no response. The woman remained motionless, her slender body in a faint white dress seemingly blending into the night. She lay face down, her long, disheveled hair obscuring most of her face. David moved even closer, just a few steps away from her. He gently nudged her shoulder, his hand touching her, and immediately he felt a chilling coldness permeate his palm. An unusual coldness unlike the night wind. At this moment, the woman slowly lifted her head, her movement strangely slow and stiff. Sarah watched from the car, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. Her heart seemed to stop, her breath caught in her throat as she saw the woman's face. Instead of having normal eyes, a nose, and a mouth, the woman's face was completely blank, smooth, without any features. A terrifying white void. A spotless flat surface. No eyebrows. No eyelids. No eye sockets. No nose. No lips. Just a blank, emotionless white mass of flesh. "David!" Sarah shrieked hysterically from the car, her scream tearing through the eerie silence of the night, echoing back from the surrounding trees. Her voice was filled with terror and despair, warning her husband of the horror she was witnessing. David startled, turning sharply to look at his wife, his eyes full of confusion. Then he turned back to look at the woman again. He too was horrified to see that featureless face. His entire body stiffened. An overwhelming fear, a horror he had never experienced before, spread throughout his body, paralyzing him. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The faceless woman slowly stood up, her movements slow and deliberate in a terrifying way. She turned directly towards David, not saying a word, not making a sound. Her bizarre figure in the darkness, with her blank, emotionless white face, made David feel suffocated, as if the air around him had been sucked dry. She just stood there, motionless, her invisible gaze seemingly piercing through him. "We have to go. David, please," Sarah screamed again, her voice trembling so much that it was barely recognizable. She pounded on the car window, trying to make David snap out of it. David didn't hesitate any longer. Terror had overcome all rational thought. He quickly turned around, sprinting back to the car at full speed, his heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel and echoing through the night. He scrambled into the driver's seat, his trembling hands fumbling with the key in the ignition. After a few terrifying seconds, the car started. David floored the accelerator, the car speeding away into the dark night, its headlights cutting through the gloomy darkness, leaving behind the lonely road and the horrifying image of the faceless woman. Both husband and wife's hearts pounded as if they would burst from their chests. The car sped through the dark night, like an arrow piercing the wind, leaving behind the eerily deserted road and the horrifying image of the faceless woman. Both Sarah and David were silent, not a word uttered, trying to regain their composure after the shock they had just experienced. Their breaths were short and heavy, their chests heaving as if about to explode. Sarah felt a chill down her spine, a creeping coldness that clung to her despite the car's high speed. Did you see that? It was real, wasn't it?" Sarah whispered softly, her voice trembling to the point of being barely audible, like a lost murmur in the confined space of the car. She dared not look directly at David, her eyes fixed on the impenetrable darkness outside the window, but she knew he was looking at her. David nodded heavily, his eyes still reflecting an intense horror, a deep fear that could not be concealed. "I saw a face, nothing at all. Just blank white." His voice was also hoarse, as if he had just escaped a terrifying nightmare. Throughout the rest of the drive home, neither of them spoke. The atmosphere in the car was tense and heavy, enveloped by an oppressive silence. The image of the woman's blank, featureless face haunted Sarah's mind, like a dark ink stain spreading across the calm painting of the late night. She tried to dispel that image, but it appeared vividly every time she closed her eyes. Upon arriving home, Sarah felt her entire body go limp, her legs like jelly, almost unable to stand. She could not forget that horrifying scene. It replayed in her mind like a broken film reel. After carefully locking the front door and checking all the windows, David and Sarah rushed upstairs to the bedroom. Lying in bed, Sarah tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken, engulfing her, and even the slightest sound made her jump in fright. The rustling of branches against the window, the wind whistling through the cracks, or even the pounding of her own heart in her chest became terrifying. She closed her eyes, trying to find peace in sleep, but the image of the featureless face appeared vividly, more frightening than when she had her eyes open. David lay beside her, also restless. He tried to hold his wife, comforting her, whispering soothing words, but he himself felt an unnamed unease. He knew Sarah was terribly scared, and he was not much better. Both were steeped in an oppressive silence, each with their own fears, but sharing a threatened space. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was staring at her in the darkness, an invisible, cold, and sinister gaze. Each time, she quickly turned on the bedside lamp, its weak yellow light dispelling some of the darkness, but unable to dispel the fear. She looked around the room, trying to find anything unusual, but there was only emptiness and terrifying silence. She felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. After the horrifying night on the deserted road, Sarah and David's life in the old wooden house seemed to have entered a new chapter. Sarah, in particular, became more sensitive and anxious than ever. The fear from that night clung to her persistently, like an invisible shadow constantly pursuing her. Whenever she was alone in the house, she always felt watched, an unseen presence weighing heavily on her back, making her constantly turn her head. She began to hear strange small noises in the house. They were faint creaking sounds upstairs, echoing down from the empty rooms they rarely used. Sometimes, she heard very soft whispers, as if someone was talking to themselves in the living room while she was in the kitchen, or a mournful sigh echoing from the hallway. Initially, she tried to ignore them, telling herself they were just the natural sounds of an old house, the creak of wood settling or the wind whistling through cracks. But then, the strange phenomena began to become clearer and more inexplicable. Sometimes, she would find small items in the house moved to inexplicable locations. A book she was reading, left on the bedside table, would suddenly be on the floor, as if someone had dropped it. The keys she carefully placed on a hook in the kitchen would reappear in the living room, neatly placed on the coffee table. This could not be attributed to her poor memory. She also frequently felt like someone was standing right behind her while she was doing chores, cooking in the kitchen, or cleaning the living room. A sudden icy cold draft would sweep through, much colder than the room temperature, making her jump and turn around, but see no one. This cold sensation often appeared suddenly in certain corners of the house, such as in the living room corner, near the doorway, or in the dark hallway, then quickly vanished, but it was enough to make her intensely uneasy. Strange dreams continued to haunt Sarah every night. She often dreamt of standing on that dark road, the sky pitch black and starless. The faceless woman slowly approached her in terrifying silence, her empty eyes like two deep black holes staring directly at her. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her dry throat. She tried to run away, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground, heavy and unable to move. When she woke up, she always found herself drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, and the fear still intact. Sarah began to feel that this house was no longer a safe place. It was not just an ordinary old house, but seemed to harbor something sinister. A dark secret slowly revealing itself, and she was being drawn into its vortex. With each passing day, the fear grew larger, weighing heavily on her mind. As time passed, the strange phenomena in the old wooden house became more frequent and frightening, as if an invisible force was testing Sarah and David's limits of endurance. Sarah began to feel that the sinister presence was not confined to the lonely road but had deeply infiltrated their home, melding into every wall, every hidden corner. She frequently saw dark shadows flitting past in the corner of her eye. Blurry, ephemeral shadows that appeared and disappeared as she walked around the house, as she sat working at her computer, or even when she looked out the window. They moved very quickly, like a wisp of dark smoke gliding by in an instant, vanishing immediately when she tried to look directly. These were fleeting images, but enough to make her jump, breaking out in a cold sweat. The whispers calling her name also became clearer and closer, no longer vague sounds. Sometimes it sounded like a mournful sigh, like a lament from the afterlife, sometimes like a sinister warning echoing in the empty space of the room. "Sarah, be careful." That voice resonated in her head, haunting her awake and asleep, making her feel as if someone was right beside her, whispering in her ear. A few times, when both husband and wife were upstairs in the bedroom, they heard the sound of objects falling or being dragged heavily downstairs. These were loud thuds, the clatter of breaking glass, making them jump and rush down to investigate. But upon arrival, everything was perfectly normal. Nothing was disturbed or damaged. Only a strange coldness lingered in the air, and a creeping sensation enveloped the space. In the mirror, Sarah began to see strange and terrifying reflections. Sometimes, fleetingly, she saw her own face become pale, lifeless, with blurry features, deep black eye sockets exactly like the blank face of the woman on the road. Her reflection's eyes seemed not to be her own, but those of another entity residing within. David, who initially tried to reassure his wife with every scientific and logical explanation, also began to notice inexplicable anomalies. He heard the strange noises Sarah had described, felt sudden chills, and sometimes glimpsed faint shadows. Once, while he was fixing a light bulb in the dark hallway, he swore he saw a tall shadow glide past behind him, and he felt an icy breath on his neck. However, he still tried to remain calm, striving to find a rational explanation, though a nameless fear had begun to stir within him too. The accumulating stress and pressure from these supernatural phenomena severely affected the couple's relationship. Sarah became irritable, easily angered, and often retreated into her fear. She began to doubt everything around her, even David. Sometimes, she looked at him with a scrutinizing gaze, wondering if he knew something more terrible about this house or that road that she didn't, if he was hiding some dark secret about this place. David worried terribly about her, trying to comfort and reassure her with loving words and promises to protect her. But it seemed that all his words failed to dispel the fear and suspicion in Sarah's heart. She brushed off all his advice, believing he didn't understand what she was going through. The relationship between the two became more strained than ever. Petty arguments suddenly escalated into fierce battles, lasting late into the night. David felt helpless and exhausted by the invisible fear that was gradually invading their lives, sowing suspicion and unease into every moment, every word. The house that was once a sanctuary of love now became a battlefield of fear and misunderstanding. They were slowly losing each other in the shadows of the haunting. Sarah couldn't bear it any longer. The extreme fear and helplessness in the face of supernatural phenomena pushed her to her limit. She decided she had to uncover the history of that lonely road and the surrounding land, despite David's advice that she should just ignore everything. She believed that a terrible truth was buried, and that truth was haunting her life. She went to the small library in Silent Creek, a quiet and ancient place, where old books filled tall wooden shelves. She spent hours rummaging through old newspaper clippings, local history books, and interviewing the oldest residents in the area. Many seemed hesitant when asked about the road and her house, their eyes showing vague worry and fear. Through fragmented accounts and faded newspaper articles, Sarah gradually pieced together a chilling picture of mysterious accidents that had occurred on that road over the years. Many people had disappeared inexplicably, leaving no trace, or were found dead in horrifying ways, with the cause of death undetermined. It was rumored that a wandering spirit haunted this road, a young woman who had been in an accident and died unjustly, her face so terribly disfigured that she was unrecognizable. Some local residents also recounted that, before accidents happened, victims often saw a woman standing silently by the side of the road in the dark, waving for help. Goodness urged them to stop, but upon approaching, they realized the woman's face was completely blank, a terrifyingly empty void. And that was the last thing they saw before disappearing or encountering a mishap. Sarah also found old newspaper articles about other mysterious disappearances in the area, not a few of which occurred near the road leading to her house. The vague details, brief phrasing, and lack of information in the old articles only added to the sinister and mysterious nature of these stories. It was as if some force was trying to conceal the truth. An elderly woman, with white hair and clouded eyes, living nearby told Sarah a local legend when Sarah came to inquire. She said that the road was once the resting place of restless spirits, people who had died suddenly or unjustly, trapped between two worlds. And sometimes, on dark nights, they would manifest to seek help, or to drag the living down with them, so they would no longer be alone in the afterlife. The old woman looked at Sarah with a warning gaze. "Young lady, that road is not a place to go alone at night. The spirits there do not wish to be disturbed." These accounts filled Sarah with immense fear. The image of the faceless woman became more haunting than ever before, a vivid, tangible, and deeply threatening obsession. She began to believe that she had not only seen a ghost, but had encountered a trapped entity, a spirit seeking release, or perhaps a spirit seeking companionship in its eternal solitude. The intense fear from the encounter with the faceless woman and the chilling stories about the lonely road clung to Sarah even in her dreams, transforming every night into a haunting battle. She constantly dreamt of being lost on that dark road, the sky pitch black and starless, without a single light illuminating the way. The faceless woman would emerge from the darkness, slowly approaching her in terrifying silence, her empty eyes like two deep black holes staring directly at her. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her dry throat. She tried to run away, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground, heavy and unable to move. In her dreams, Sarah often heard sinister whispers calling her name, echoing from all directions, like an invitation from the dead. She felt a cold, damp hand touch her, caressing her arm, then gripping her ankle, pulling her down into an endless abyss. She woke up in a panic, drenched in sweat, the sheets soaked, her heart pounding as if it would burst from her chest. Her breathing was ragged, and the fear remained intact, even more intense than when she was awake. The accumulated stress from the terrifying dreams and severe sleep deprivation made Sarah irritable, easily angered, and often withdrawn in fear. She would easily burst into tears over the smallest things, and sudden panic attacks frequently overwhelmed her. She began to doubt everything around her, distrusting everyone, even David. Sometimes, she looked at him with a scrutinizing gaze, wondering if he knew something more terrible about this house or that road that she didn't, if he was hiding some dark secret. The suspicion grew steadily, like a dark cloud covering her mind. David also sensed the alarming change in his wife's behavior. He worried about her immensely, trying to comfort and reassure her in every way possible, whispering loving words and promising to protect her. He suggested taking her to a doctor, believing she was suffering from severe nervous stress. But it seemed that all his words failed to dispel the fear and suspicion in Sarah's heart. She brushed off all his advice, believing he didn't understand what she was going through. The relationship between the two became more strained than ever. Small arguments suddenly escalated into fierce battles, dragging on late into the night. David felt helpless and exhausted by the invisible fear that was gradually invading their lives, sowing suspicion and unease into every moment, every word. The house that was once a sanctuary of love now became a battlefield of fear and misunderstanding. They were slowly losing each other in the shadows of the haunting. The strange phenomena in the house continued to escalate violently and more clearly, as if an invisible force was enraged and wanted to expose its existence. Sarah and David began to witness inexplicable events more explicitly and directly than ever before, rendering all scientific explanations meaningless. One fateful evening, as they both sat eating dinner in the kitchen, the room suddenly fell into an eerie silence. Then abruptly, the chandelier hanging from the ceiling began to shake violently, its crystal strands clinking together, despite no wind or external impact. The plates on the dining table slid on their own, clinking against each other as if someone was playing a sinister game. David and Sarah looked at each other in horror, their eyes filled with helplessness and fear. Another time, when Sarah was alone in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, all the wooden cabinet doors simultaneously flew open with a loud bang, releasing a sudden icy draft into the room. Pots and pans hanging on the wall suddenly fell clattering to the floor, and glass cups on the kitchen counter shattered into pieces. Sarah shrieked in terror and backed away, feeling as if an invisible hand was trying to attack her. Most terrifyingly, late one night, as Sarah was trying to drift into a restless sleep, she suddenly woke up to a heartbreaking cry echoing from outside the house. The cry was a woman's voice, sounding very painful, desperate, and full of hatred, exactly like the cry she had heard on the road that day. But this time it was much closer, as if it was right outside their bedroom window. Sarah shook David awake frantically, her face pale with fear. Both listened in terrifying silence, the cry echoing in the still night, sometimes far, sometimes near, as if the woman was lurking around the house, searching for them. The cry lasted for a few minutes, then gradually faded and stopped, leaving a deadly silence. The next morning, they checked around the house but found no trace of an accident or any injured person. There was nothing unusual. Sarah knew that cry was not from a living person. It was the cry of the faceless woman, trying to contact her, seeking help, or trying to drag her into her darkness, turning her into another part of the horrifying world she inhabited. She felt a malevolent and furious presence enveloping the house, an entity that was angry and wanted something back. In utter desperation, Sarah decided to seek one last clue about the history of the house and this land, believing it was the only way to free herself from the terrifying haunting. She spent hours rummaging through the attic, where dust and cobwebs clung to everything, until she found an old wooden trunk, rotten and covered in the dust of time. Inside the trunk, she found yellowed old papers, faded black and white photographs, and old belongings of David's family. Her heart ached when she saw a few worn-out children's toys and a tarnished hairpin. But what caught her attention most was an old diary, its leather cover peeling, resting neatly at the bottom of the trunk. The diary belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hayes, who had once lived in this house in the 1930s, before David's grandfather bought it. Eleanor was not David's great-grandmother, but a previous tenant. The diary entries were written in elegant handwriting, but the content recounted strange and frightening experiences Eleanor had gone through in this very house and the surrounding area. She had written about strange noises in the night, the constant feeling of being watched, and terrifying recurring dreams about a lonely road and an invisible figure. One diary entry particularly caught Sarah's attention and sent shivers down her spine. Eleanor had written about seeing a woman standing silently by the side of the road at night, in a torrential downpour. Compassion had prompted Eleanor to go out to help, but upon approaching, she realized the woman had no face, just a terrifying blankness. Eleanor had been extremely frightened and believed it was a sinister omen, a warning from the afterlife. She had tried to leave, but it seemed some invisible force held her back. The diary ended abruptly, with only a few last scribbled lines, mentioning that Eleanor felt something pulling her deeper into the darkness, and she couldn't resist. There was no information about Eleanor's fate afterwards, but her words gave Sarah a chilling feeling, as if history was repeating itself, as if a horrifying loop was enveloping the women who lived in this house. One night, as Sarah stood at the living room window, looking out at the lonely road in the dark, the faint moonlight illuminating the wet asphalt, she faintly saw the figure of a woman standing in the middle of the road, a frighteningly familiar shape, like a dark stain on the gray canvas of the night. Sarah felt her heart stop, her breath caught in her throat. She tried to see more clearly, her eyes fixed on that figure, but the darkness was too thick and the light too dim. Suddenly, the figure slowly turned its face towards her, a slow and deliberate movement. Although she couldn't see the features clearly, Sarah sensed a terrifying emptiness, a horrifying invisibility staring directly at her, piercing through the window glass, piercing into her soul. She felt an icy cold draft sweep in, making her shiver. An overwhelming fear rose, but this time it wasn't just fear, but a chilling realization. She knew that the faceless woman not only wanted to haunt her, but she was searching for something, a release, and perhaps she wanted Sarah's help. After that vague but deeply haunting encounter, Sarah knew she couldn't run forever. The haunting of the faceless woman had become an inseparable part of her life, like a constant shadow, whether she was awake or asleep. Between her and the spirit, there seemed to be an invisible thread, a silent plea for help. The strange phenomena in the house continued, reminding her of that sinister presence. Sometimes, she would still hear the heartbreaking cry echoing from the lonely road in the dark night. A mournful and desperate cry, like an echo from a tragic past. The feeling of being watched never disappeared, and the terrifying nightmares continued to plague her. Sarah and David tried to find out more about Eleanor Hayes, hoping to find a final answer to her tragedy. They searched through archives, inquired with other elderly people in the area, but there wasn't much information. Her fate remained an unanswered mystery, a missing piece in the puzzle of the haunting. David still tried to stay strong, but helplessness and fear also began to gnaw at him. Finally, after many sleepless nights and continuous panic attacks, they decided to leave the old wooden house. They couldn't bear this fear and haunting any longer. They sold the house for a pittance, not daring to reveal any details about what they had experienced. They just wanted to escape that place as quickly as possible, hoping to find peace elsewhere. But even after moving to a modern apartment in another vibrant city, Sarah could never forget the faceless figure on the lonely road. That image reappeared in her mind every time she closed her eyes, a persistent and relentless haunting. She still often had nightmares about it, about the dark road, about the heartbreaking cry, and about the feeling of being pulled into an abyss. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when everything fell into absolute silence, she still felt like someone was staring at her in the darkness. A sinister and terrifyingly familiar feeling, as if that faceless spirit was still watching her, no matter how far she went. Perhaps, That spirit not only wanted to be released, but also wanted a companion, someone to share its eternal loneliness. Has Sarah truly escaped the haunting? Or is that faceless spirit still watching her, waiting for the right moment to pull her into its horrifying loop, turning her into the next victim of the lonely road in the old house? The answer will probably forever remain an unanswered mystery, an eternal fear, haunting Sarah's sleep in every moment of her life. If the story of the faceless figure on the lonely road sent shivers down your spine, if you believe in true horror and hidden mysteries, please support our channel. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next haunting stories, where we uncover the deepest fears. Thanks for listening.